Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Wilde from Pro Writing Aid. Thank you for joining us once again for our monthly Ask a Book Doctor series. My guest, as always, for this session is our resident book doctor, Sally Oj. How are you doing, Sally?
I'm doing so well. And again, thank you. Really, thank you so much to everyone who sent messages when I couldn't make it last month. It was so appreciated. And I'm very well. The sun is shining. We're coming out of lockdown. Everything's good.
Goodness knows how long. So, Sally, before we get started, I just want to ask you, I've seen a lot of love for you on Twitter in the last few weeks. So anything you can share? Anything?
Isn't it lovely? It's been so nice. Well, the main thing, yes, is that one of the authors that I have worked with, who's called Rosie Fiore, wrote a wonderful book, and I think I've talked to you about it, Tom. Even when I was working on it, I was so excited about it. And she's got a very, very good agent. So the future of the book, I think, looks very good. And I think Rosie posted something, and then other people chimed in. It was lovely. But I've got, I've been so lucky over the past few years to work on so many terrific books, and I get very, very emotionally invested in the books that I work on, and I really sort of, go to a lot of I go the last mile to sort of, I really, really get emotionally involved. So to see something wonderful like that happen is really exciting. And I do, if there are any Dracula fans here, I mean the Bram Stoker Dracula, I'm sure Rosie won't mind me mentioning, it won't be out for a year or two, obviously, but and actually I should say she hasn't got a publisher yet, but I feel certain that she will get a publisher. It's called The Death and Life of Lucy Westenra. So if there are any Bram Stoker fans out there, do look out for it, because it's an absolute cracker. It's a wonderful book.
And so you mentioned about, you putting everything into it. You could see that. I was scrolling through Twitter, and it seemed like a snowball of just a lot of lovely comments. So that was great, fantastic.
It was so nice. It was just brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. So tonight, however, on to the present right now, and we're talking about tension and conflict. And in fact, to kick things off, I'm going to quote something that you put in Twitter yesterday.
Today, I think.
Today, sorry, you tweeted ahead of this session. You said, a lack of tension is so often the issue at the heart of a manuscript that just isn't working, even if everything else is in place. So let's start with that. What do you mean?
It's funny. You can have a book where everything is great. The characterization is great. The writing is excellent. They're not telling, they're showing, all the classic things are bang on. And if at the heart of the story there isn't tension, it won't work. And I've had this so many times over the years with books that I've worked on. And I sort of think of it as sort of the silent killer, a lack of tension, because it's something that doesn't get a lot of attention. But it really, really does make a tremendous difference, because tension is the thing, it's the thing that it pulls you into a book. It keeps you, it's the glue, that sort of grips the reader from the first. And not only the glue that sort of grips them, but it keeps them wanting to read. It keeps them wanting to turn the pages. Yeah. So tension is basically page turnability, and without that you're kind of stuck, however good everything else is.
But are we saying, is it a difficult thing to manage in terms of, is it a fine balance between not enough or too much? Are you constantly fine-tuning it, or what are the issues you see?
It doesn't have to be tension like sort of cliffhanger. I mean, of course, cliffhangers, yes, good. Oscar Wilde's an Oscar Wilde quote is, "The tension is killing me. I hope it lasts." you know. So but it is more in the sense of page turnability and getting the reader engaged, because if the reader's not engaged, this anything can be happening, but the reader's not going to care very much. So it's keeping the sense of page turnability up, which I know sounds very vague, but what we're going to do today is get into that and find out what it is.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. So let's do that. How do we, you know, how do we tackle it? How do you advise some of your clients that you're working with to get this right?
Well, I have some general rules about tension. I mean, I'm sure if you go online, you'll see pretty much the same things. But I have sort of collected them together. And if there's anyone here, I don't know if there's anyone here that I've worked with, but you probably, we'd have talked about this. So general rules, Sally OJ's general rules about tension. So the first thing is what I just said: help your reader to become more invested in your character. The more active, the more accessible your characters are, the more we as readers will want to sort of, you know, run after them through the story. So make sure that your readers are fully round. If you can get to all your readers, that would be good. Make sure that your characters are all very fully rounded. You know, the more accessible, the more open they are, the more that we'll want to join them in this story. And that's important, obviously, that this happens at the beginning of the book and then keeps going. So that's the first thing, is we need to be able to engage. And, you know, I had a wonderful book 2 or 3 years ago, really good plot, really good plot. But at the heart of it was a character that was so flat that we just couldn't engage with him, and it was really difficult to care about the story.
Okay.
And, you know, it's true that the writing was good and the plot, you know, I did keep reading, but I didn't care, you know, there were ups, there were downs, and I was just like, you know. So on paper she had all the right things, but I didn't care about him, and it, by which I don't mean I disliked him, which is a completely different thing. I didn't really care about him, and so I couldn't engage with it. So a very obvious thing about tension is you need to know what the characters are struggling against. This comes down to, you know, your basic rules of writing, which everyone here will know. But we need to know what your characters are scared of, what they hope for,
right,
what's got them to this point in their own stories. Now, the danger with this, of course, is you don't want to sort of at the beginning of the book do a whole sort of information dump or a whole load of exposition. So you want to trickle that out gradually in the first few chapters. And of course, then throughout, you know, you can have your da moments as the book goes on. And it's good to save some stuff back, obviously, for as the book reels out. Depending on the kind of book, depending on the genre, the more twists and turns, the better. I mean, if it's a gentle romance, you know, you're not going to want too many people, you know, leaping out of closets, rattling skeletons. But the you know, you don't want a very linear plot. So the more it twists and turns about, the more, you know, cliffhangers are always good. It depends on the genre. It depends on what you're writing.
Yeah.
And, you know, everyone here will know this, putting your characters under some kind of pressure, or giving one of them a secret that they worry about coming to light, or having some kind of time limit. All these could be things that we, the reader, know about, but, you know, the other characters don't know about. So there's this sense of like, is she going to pull it off before this? Or, but what if they find about his what, or, you know, some kind of pressure.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things that really ramp up the investment for your reader.
And I know you've said before that it can be really good if we didn't see it coming, if we didn't see something coming, right? Which is something we've both.
Yeah, that's really good. And of course, pressure can be internal as well.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't have to be sort of big moments. It can be internal pressure, and so you know, it's very good somehow to give the reader information about one or two of the characters. You know, ideally your protagonist, but it doesn't even have to be the protagonist. You can be one of the minor or secondary characters, so that there's this, you know, will this happen? Will this pay off? Is this going to be all right? Is this going to not be all right? These are the things. And it sounds as if I'm saying you should chuck all this into the book, and not at all. You know, you need long periods where none of this is happening. But what's important is if you set things up right towards the beginning of your book, which sounds much more complicated than it actually is. Most writers do it naturally. Most plots suggest it naturally. Then you can have long periods of calm, long sort of periods of breathing calmly, and until the sort of adrenaline starts pumping again. And that's important as well. That's always important. And, you know, tension, you can do it several ways. It can build. The most common way to do it is to have it build gradually throughout the story, so that, you know, again, when we talk about crime writers and thriller writers, you know, there's one of my favorite sort of thriller or crime writers is Elizabeth George, who's just a master at her art, and she always builds it very slowly. Mm-hmm. But you get gripped somehow straight away. And
it's interesting. So sorry, I'm going to come to bring this back to my favorite current book, Sal, which I've told you about. I just finished reading Chubby Bane.
Yes.
Which isn't, you know, it's not a thriller.
No.
It's not a mystery. But my goodness, does that book maintain a sense of ebbing and flowing tension? So you know when the moments are coming, when this scene is building to something, and you kind of don't want it to happen, but you know it's inevitably going to happen somehow. And lo and behold, it does. But it's addictive from a reader's point of view. I find, you know, you kind of I'm totally hooked.
Well, there's a reason it's been such a huge hit, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's no car chases, there's no one, you know, falling out of planes, there's no, you know, smoking guns, but the tension is there, and that's what you need. Conflict is always a great source of tension, obviously, and we'll talk a bit more about that as well. That's, you know, and one of the important things I have found over the years is finding the right place to reveal something in a story. You know, you don't want to, well, it changes completely from story to story, obviously it does, but, you know, you've got to be careful with your reveal. You've got to time it right, and you've got to plan it quite often. I know there's a lot of people who don't like planning their plots, but if you've got a big reveal, it's a good idea to really sit down and think about when would be the right time, because after you've done it, then you've got to keep people interested after your big reveal. So, you know, that can be what I often suggest to people is a very good way of doing a reveal is to, well, I mean, it's very obvious, is to have us reading the book and thinking something is one thing, and then we discover that it's another thing entirely. That you know, sort of almost quite a gentle.
We're getting into fingersmith territory now for me.
Exactly, but not even as big as that, but just like, oh my God, you know, I thought he was so nice, or I thought, you know, it really was a dog, or I thought, whatever. And
there's an art to that, right? Like you say, to do with, I guess, timing, but so many things.
There is an art to it, of course, but like everything with writing, it's a craft, and you can learn your craft.
Right. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so you've talked about subplots and giving kind of incidental characters backstories, and what else? You know, are there any other?
I haven't actually we've talked about subplots, you and I.
No, sorry. I haven't talked about. You talked about unimportant characters, and
that's right.
To me, I'm kind of thinking not subplot. I'm thinking backstory. Then
backstory, yeah. So, and sorry, I didn't mean.
That's
the next thing I was actually going to talk about is conflict, because conflict is subtly different from tension, and any really good plot will have a sort of healthy crunch of conflict to really make it bite. And you know, a mistake that a lot of people make is their protagonist is really nice and really perfect and never makes mistakes, and you know, and that's boring. You know, we want a little bit of grit in the oyster when we don't get a pearl, you know. So perfect characters are often a problem. You know, you can obviously they need to have something to aim for. We know this, everyone here knows this. They've got to have something to aim for, and they usually get thwarted a few times. We know Freytag's pyramid, where, you know, everything goes wrong during the falling action and then it comes right again, but that's conflict, you know.
Yeah.
And have a few, not, when I say arguments, I don't necessarily mean have your characters sort of screaming at each other, but you know, if you're going off, everyone here knows that if you've got a quest plot, that the characters are going to argue about the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, but in a different kind of plot, it's good to have a bit of tension. It's good to have, often, like I said, it can be a conflict. I mean, it can be internal conflict. It can be a person doubting themselves. And again, I'm not suggesting really shoveling it all on. Just a little bit of this seeded through a plot will make a big difference.
Yeah, and sorry, I interrupted you, so
well, just that I'm not suggesting shoveling this all in, but if you feel that your plot isn't somehow kicking, it's probably because it needs some tension or some conflict. And sometimes, yes, a subplot, which I will talk about whenever.
Hang on. So before we get on subplot, I just noticed in chat, Jack's mentioned something that I've also read about. You know, there should be conflict on every page, whether that's internal or external. And again, that could be minor, bubbling away, I suppose, couldn't it? But is that true? Is that kind of? I
wouldn't necessarily. I mean, it's certainly not true. But you've got to think of it. That's what I said about breathers. You know, you've got to think of your reader who is being sort of slapped around the face for this. So if it's done well, it can be on every page, but it's certainly got to tick along. It's certainly got to be in every chapter, and it's certainly got to be thematically throughout the book, one way or another. And it can be quite low octane. It doesn't have to be. But, you know, this book that I was talking about, that I worked on a few years ago, it's always stuck in my mind because it was just such a perfect example of it. And what happened was this character arrived at this situation and sort of found it all a bit puzzling and worked it out. And that was the end of the story. And it was very well written, and it was actually quite a good plot. But there was just no, you know, there was just no boulders to climb over, you know, and he was a very nice character, and he was a very good character, and you know, so I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but you know, it's always stuck in my mind, that particular book.
Okay, we have got some questions coming up, and I'm just thinking, I just want to encourage anyone, if you are experiencing any of these issues or struggling with tension and conflict or have questions about it, do put them in the Q&A panel. We generally come to questions kind of a little bit into it, so I'll give another 5 minutes before we crack on with the questions. But yeah, do put them in the question answer box. Right, Sal, back to you.
Well, I just wanted to talk a bit about subplot, because I know we're going to get into questions, and it's our favourite bit. We love the questions best. But what I have found over the years is that, you know, at first when I started to do this 28 years ago, I used to struggle. I used to think, what is it that this book needs that will help it? And very often a subplot will solve all your tension problems. And the problem is that if you've written a book without a subplot, it's difficult to then write one in. It's difficult to shoehorn one in. So you have to sort of slightly dismantle your book and you know, one of the best ways is to have a character that we think is very innocuous, so it turns out sort of at the climax of the book is so, you know, not a minor character at all, and then we get maybe some flashbacks, or we get some, you know, that kind of thing. That's a good kind of subplot. So the main plot is where all the action that carries the story forward happens, where all the important characters are established. We know that. But if you've got a subplot, you've got the possibility for extra layers of story, more backstory, subsequently more depth, more detail, extra tension. And inevitably it will add to the main arc, because if you're reading the subplot, you're thinking, oh, you know, this has just happened. How is this going to impact the main story?
Yeah.
So as well as supporting the central theme, a subplot should add variety, a different setting, a different group of people, even a different time. And all this helps to keep the plot engaging in a very vital way, and it keeps the tension going, it keeps the pacing barreling along usually as well, either with literal complications or with suggestion of what might have been or what might be to come. This is the way that it can work. And there's, I don't know how much, well, no, I think it's important. So I was going to say, I don't know how much I should talk about subplots. So there are different subplot possibilities. Obviously, you've got the sort of explanatory subplot, which is basically a counter story or a backstory or something like that, which explains where we are now, you know, shines light on the cause or effect behind what's happening in the main plot. Or it can be something that's happening in a different place at the same time, you know, illustrating an element of the story. And this is the kind of thing that can immediately snap the main plot into focus if you've got some kind of counterpoint going on to it. Okay. It can be really, really helpful. Obviously, a lot of people use romantic subplots, and that's very good. So while the main plot is going, we've got this will they or won't they? Oh, they probably won't. No, yes, they have. No, they've split up. You know, that if you can engage in that romantic subplot, that's very helpful, because that will keep you, you know, while the main story is happening, you're still thinking, you know, what's going to happen with them. So that's always a good one. You can obviously have a subplot that you know, is completely unexpected, where you suddenly flash to a different place and time altogether. Yeah. And it runs in parallel with the plot. If you can make that work, that's quite clever. But the key point of a subplot is to help develop and progress the main plot. Okay. But that is where you can get an awful lot of tension just from the counterpoint between the two. So if there's a lack of tension, I always suggest thinking about a subplot. And one of the things I really enjoy doing with an author is sort of digging into the plot and thinking, well, what about this character? You know, could we look at this character? Or what about this situation that you've mentioned? Could that actually be more than we thought it was? And if it works and an author goes, oh my God, yes. You know what I find very often is an author says, I thought of that. I thought of developing that character, but then I sort of didn't. So often it's there in an author's mind. It's sort of sleeping there quite often. So if you know, or if somebody tells you that your book is lacking tension, do consider the possibility of a subplot, because it can, and I could talk about subplots for ages, because the more I've learned over the years, and the more authors I've worked with, the more rich this subject becomes. But just simply that, if you're leaking tension, think about developing one bit of the story, or one of the characters, or bring in a completely new thing as a subplot, and it could really make all the difference. Okay, so on that tension, but you don't have to, of course. It's just a suggestion. No, and on that tension and subplot point, one of our first questions this evening was, is there such a thing as too much tension? I have 6 subplots that are connected to the 2 plot points. Is that too much? Hearing it as you've just described it, yes. Because as with every subject we talk about, think of your reader. Okay, your reader doesn't want to be confused. Your reader doesn't want to get lost. If you've done it brilliantly, if it's really clear, then go for it. You know, if you're showing it to beta readers and they're getting it, and that's fine. But to a degree, you want to keep it relatively simple. To a degree, I mean, I say that and look at all the fantastically complicated books that have been huge hits. So, but the main thing is just keep your reader in mind. So if you're doing it, remember that you're writing this book to be read and for a reader.
Yeah.
Without looking at the manuscript, 6 sounds a lot. 6 sounds too much. But maybe you could fold a couple of them into a couple of them. You know, maybe you could integrate them. Maybe you're getting feedback that says they're working fantastically. I don't know, but I would, my reaction is to feel uneasy about that many. But you're on the right track. You're on the right track with what you're doing.
So just going back to it's a question that's come in and mentioned, you know, you talked about the book that had the kind of flat main character that you kind of didn't engage with. How did you overcome that? How did you remedy that? How did you work with them?
Well, in that particular case, we just talked about that fact, and they were a good enough author that they, you know, sometimes you just need somebody to shine a light. This author had spent so much time on getting the plot right, on writing beautifully, on developing, you know, certain aspects of the story, that they'd sort of forgotten that although the main character was very vivid to them, they had to make them come to life on the page. So in that particular case, it was simply a case of saying, I don't know this person and I don't care about them at all.
Yeah.
And the author was very, very surprised, but then I think realized that all the stuff that was very vivid, we've talked before about getting the stuff out of your head and onto the page, and that's what had happened. This character was so vivid to this author that they've forgotten that they actually had to get that down on the page for the reader. It's the same thing. Think of your reader. It's exactly what we're just talking about. Remember that you're writing for your reader. You always have to remember that. If you get that, an awful lot of your problems disappear, to tell you the truth.
Yes, yeah, I think we mention it every session, don't we?
Every session.
Okay, so
it's what we should call ourselves. Think of your reader.
Yeah, don't forget we need to get condiments in there as well. So another question actually from the same person. Does the drive to create and maintain tension typically require a violent setup? Chapter 1. Absolutely
not. Of course, I mean, of course you can do that, and that should work. And, you know, it's a very well, when I say trope, you know, trope doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's a very well used trope, but certainly not. No, I mean, if you think about people like Sarah Waters, if you think about The Paying Guest, which is one of the most tension-infused books I've ever read, it starts in the most gentle way. You're drawn in, you're very, very drawn in, you know, and the reason you're drawn in is you know something is about to happen. She sets it up perfectly because you know something is about to happen, and then when that something happens, she keeps you realizing that something else is going to happen, and then there's something else that you think is going to happen does happen, but then, my God, something else happens that you didn't see coming at all. So the actual beginning of a book can be very gentle, but it's got to be it's got to pull you in, it's got to pull you forward, so that
of
course you can
it's interesting you mentioned that book, Sal, actually, because one of the things that stays with me for that is just this underlying tension between, and I'm so bad with remembering names, but between the main character and her mother living together in that house, and there is just this undercurrent of tension the whole time, isn't there, because of family troubles in the past and you know, everything. So it's kind of this undercurrent that just every now and then you get a spike.
And the tension of the situation that is happening in the book, and then the other situation, and all of that. Yes, you know, it just she layers it, layer after layer after layer, and it works. But in answer to the question that was asked, of course you can do it like that. That happens often, and as long as you keep it a bit original and a bit don't fall into the trap of doing what other people have done before, then absolutely go for it. That'll get your readers' attention, no doubt about that.
Yeah. Okay, are you okay, Sally, if we just carry on with a few questions? Because so, hi, Sally, I started my novel with tension. However, I heard a podcast that says you never start a fantasy novel with a dream. I heard a podcast that you never start a fantasy novel with a dream. What are your thoughts? This was a panel of fantasy writers.
My thoughts is, why do people say never? I don't really understand that. I mean, if it was a panel of fantasy writers, obviously they know what they're talking about, but why not start with? I mean, I suppose what they're saying is it's cheesy. You start with a dream, it's cheesy. But look at, I don't know, any of you here know Rebecca? It's another one that I fall back on mentioning all the time. Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, that starts with a dream. It's one of the best books ever written. So I know you're talking about a different genre, you're talking about fantasy, but I don't think anyone should ever say never, because for all they know, your book is going to start with the best dream ever and it's going to be fantastic. What I say, try starting your fantasy novel with a dream and see how it works. It might not work, but I don't ever understand this never. It just doesn't make sense to me. It kills creativity. People pile on these rules and I don't get it. I mean, I know I'm here piling on rules. Obviously, it's fine when I do it. Other people know. But these sort of don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. I don't ever understand it. You've got to write your book. And if you then get feedback from people saying, actually, that dream's a bit cheesy, well, then reconsider. But obviously, they may have, extrapolated on why they say never do it.
Yeah.
And they, if they were all in agreement and think it's a terrible thing to do, well, you should listen to what people are saying. It could be that it's an overused trope in the genre. I don't know. I mean, I like fantasy novels, but it could be that it's just overused. That it could just be that.
Sandra has just reminded us that Hunger Games starts.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely, yeah.
Never say never. Okay.
Yeah.
There are a few questions actually about genre itself, so let's go through a few of those. John asks, how does tension concept apply to prescriptive non-fiction?
Well, it's still really important, because you want your readers to read your book, and if you're writing non-fiction, you've still got to hit all the right spots. You've still got to want them engaged with your subject. You've still got to want them to know what you're going to say. You've still got to lead them from the beginning of the book to the end of the book on a satisfying journey. So obviously the tension isn't going to be quite the same, but you still need to have tension. It'll come out in it depends what. Can we ask what the non-fiction book is? Can we just quickly get that? A rough idea, quick and rough, very quick, one sentence.
Yeah, so John Glass, if you can add that in chat or in Q&A, that would be great. I know I had a similar question actually, but around memoir writing from Richard. So how do you incorporate tension and conflict in?
Well, memoir is a perfect example. You don't want to say on the first page. Well, the thing is, you can say on the first page, I've only got one leg now, and I can only speak German, but when I was a young man, I was a track star and spoke Hungarian. So if you set that up, what happened? Great.
Yeah.
Or you can start in a very conventional way, but if you start in a very conventional way, you do need, because the beginnings of people's lives often aren't, the interesting stuff starts later. So you either choose a memorable, a very interesting moment in it was 1963, I was standing at Cape Canaveral, you know, watching blah, you know, 25 years earlier. So, you know, that's going to get people hooked. Oh, what happened? How did they get there? So it's a case of engaging your, it's about engagement. So this is with the nonfiction as that John was talking about as well. It's about engaging your reader. You want them interested, you want them to keep them on board, and you want them to keep turning the pages. So you're going to need tension to do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Angine has asked for a quick summary on rules about tension. Maybe we should put something together that's actually kind of a few.
Well, to be frank, it wasn't particularly quick, but I did give a summary, and I'm just trying to look and see if I've got something on my computer. So get the reader invested in your characters. Give us a sense of what the characters are struggling against. The more twists and turns, the better. Putting your characters under some kind of pressure, a secret or time limit or something like that. Look, I memorized all this, something like that. Conflict is a good sense of tension, obviously. Remember what Oscar Wilde said, the suspense is terrible, I hope it will last. And then we talked about putting breathers in so it's not happening all the time. And then we talked about, do you build it gradually through your story? Because if you start with a bang, then you've got to keep the tension up. And then I talked about, what did I talk about then? I talked about conflict. And I said, don't make all your characters lovely. You know, your characters need to be flawed. And then we talked about subplots. Well, characters need something to aim for. Make sure that the conflict runs through the whole story. The characters are well-rounded. Arguments can be useful.
A good summary. Let's someone's actually asked, can we get a printed list? Let me think about this. We maybe we'll put something together and send it out as a PDF or something like that, or even it'd be good to have a blog post on this actually. But obviously all these will be in the recording, so everyone will get the recording, so you can just be able to listen again. But back to questions, if that's okay, because I'm now conscious of time ticking on. And Amelia's asked a really interesting question, I think. She said, in my story, a character eludes me who is important to the plot, but I can't seem to bring him to life. Should I just remove him from the story, or are there techniques to getting a character to come to life on the page?
So if I was working with you, I would ask, why did you have him there in the first place? What does he represent? Why is he there? If quite often, and this comes back to getting the story out of your head and onto the page, quite often you'll find that characters are in first or second or third drafts even, because everyone listening here will know this, when your book is cooking in your head, the story is often it's almost like a satisfying daydream. You've got all these things happening and they don't have to be logical. The characters don't have to make sense really, because in your head, you just fill in all the blanks. So quite often it comes to when you put it on the page, you know, a certain scene that was very key and very satisfying in your head, or a certain character who you really liked, isn't actually necessary. And so what you have to do is think, why did I think of this character? What is she or he representing? Why have I brought them into the story? Is it something that can just be folded in with the other characters? Is it something that can be told in a different way? Or do I actually need this character? So if I do actually need this character, how can I bring out the core of the character? So you sit down and you make some notes on the character, and you make some notes about his or her place in the plot, and you ask yourself, the very good thing to do if you can persuade somebody to it is to get somebody to interview you about the character as if it was a real person. Get somebody to say, right, tell me about Susan. and you say, well, Susan comes from America, and the person that aren't, you know, will say, well, we're in America, and yeah, so that is a very, very good way to get to the bottom of the character, if you can persuade somebody to do it. No, it doesn't really work if you interview yourself. It has to be,
yeah,
it has to be somebody else.
That's a
patented Sally OJ advice there.
Okay, thanks, Sal. Kim asks, okay, so my question is that in romance, I'm told romance cannot be the character's main goal. Okay, so I have a heroine with a strong subplot, but the hero's goals and desires, while he does have a job and minor goals, his big desire in the book is getting the girl. Do you think I'm shooting myself in the foot by letting him want love as his main desire?
Again, can we not all reel off books where this is the main plot point?
Yeah.
You know, again, if somebody has told you, or if you've read somewhere that this, what people have to remember is, and I suppose, you know, I'm doing the same thing, but as I said, when I do it, it's fine. But very often, excellent writing blogs or excellent even writing classes are dealing with everybody's book. They're dealing right across the board. If you're like me, you're working with one book at a time. You're really focusing on one writer and one book at a time. But if you're writing about all writing, or if you're talking about all writing, you have to, I suppose, generalize, and you have to say, you know, don't be corny, don't do this, don't do that. But the truth is, of course, a book can be romance-led. Naturally, it can. I mean, can we just talk about Gone with the Wind for a minute? You know, everyone can chuck in their favorite book that is romance-led. And I know everyone's going to say Gone with the Wind is about lots of other things as well. Of course it is. But, you know, there are so many. But I mean, even, again, my old favorite, Rebecca, is very led by her love for the main, for one of the other characters. So, of course you can, in my opinion. And I think it's very important to remember that when you read this writing advice online, or when you go to a seminar, or when you attend a writing course, they aren't dealing with your, well, of course, sometimes they are, but as generally, you know, they're talking right across the board. They can't be, and then they can only give very good advice, but it's general advice. And do remember that. Something that they say can't work might work for you. It really might.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Sal. There's some good comments in chat actually about rules, knowing when you wrote them, and rules being tools. Thanks for that, Jack.
Well, you know, hello, James Joyce, you know.
Yeah. So Sherry has just asked, Sherry's writing her first novel, voraciously reading every craft book she can find. Is there one you would recommend? I'm sure this may be one for our other kind of attendees, listeners tonight, that could serve as a checklist or filtering device that would help me evaluate what I've written to see if the tension is building, but not to the point of exhausting the reader.
So, bearing in mind what I've just said, and you will have found, I'm sure, if you're reading lots of books, that they do contradict each other an awful lot. I know from my authors that Stephen King on writing is a very, very good book. That seems to be one that comes up over and over again, and just seems to give good, simple, plain advice on how to write a book. Other people have, I mean, that's the one I feel safe in recommending, because I know so many people who've said it's a great book. But again, and don't misunderstand me, it's great that people, I mean, I actively encourage people to go out and read about their craft. But you will notice that what one book says you must do, another book will say you mustn't do. It's not, there's no absolutely solid, definite rules, unless you're listening to me, in which case I am completely right and you must do what I say. But otherwise, not at all. Yeah,
it's one that's been mentioned several times, and is popular with our other listeners, I know, and
Yeah.
I think there'll be some other suggestions coming through in chat in a minute, Sherry.
I know some people are put off because they think he's just writing about horror writing, but he's not at all. He's just talking about the craft of writing.
Great, thank you, Sal. Okay, we have probably time for a couple more questions.
Gosh, that went quick.
I know, I know. So in a retelling, how do you keep the tension since the reader knows the outcome?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, sure. In a retelling, how do you keep the tension since the reader knows the outcome?
You put new stuff in there. If you're retelling something, your reader is going to get very bored if you're just reiterating what they already know. You have to put some new facts in there. You've got to put some new stuff in there. It doesn't have to be like a huge reveal, but it just needs to be some, or you shine a light on something. When you saw the thing before, the red car went past and it was just sort of mentioned casually, but when you retell it, the red car becomes very important. So it's either bringing out something that it was mentioned in the story before but not as important, or it's just putting extra stuff in. That's you have to do that. See, it's all right when I say you have to do something.
I'm momentarily distracted by a meowing cat once again. I don't know what it is about this session.
I think
Millie always senses it.
Yeah, the cat should have their name on the
She's got a question for you, Sam. Okay, let's finish up with this one question from Jack, which was an early question to come in, so I need to go back to it. Jack asks, how do you feel about including a global pandemic in a novel today?
I would, that I'm sort of braced next year for the influx of pandemic novels that I'm going to get. I think, there was just this drama on the BBC called The Pact. I don't know if people here watched it. And it became apparent about halfway through that it was set, it seemed to be completely contemporary, but it became apparent that it was set after the pandemic. And there was a few allusions to, when we went into lockdown, and, I was very changed by when we're in lockdown. I did a lot of thinking. So it wasn't the main story, but it alluded to it. So although this story seemed very contemporary, it was presumably set 2 or 3 years in the future when, in this story anyway, everything was all right again. So I would suggest, if you're going to bring, there's just going to be so much. There's just going to be so much. And of course there is. It's like, on another school of thought, there are so many books about the war because it's everyone. So if you don't make your book about the pandemic, set your story in the pandemic and make it a story on its own that happens in the pandemic, then I think it should be all right. But writing a book where the pandemic is the main story. And the other thing, and this is really important, think about it, people aren't going to want to read about pandemics at all. They're sick of pandemics. That's the last thing people are going to want to read about.
I think that's the point Barb just made in chat, actually.
As really?
As a reader, I don't want to read it, just like I'm sick of serial killers. Obviously, it's an opinion, but yeah, I'm sure.
No, it's really important. People are not going to want to read about them, unless you do something absolutely brilliant, which of course you may do. Yeah. I would heartily suggest that you write a story which could happen anytime and set it against the background of the pandemic. That could work very well.
Great. Sally, I think that's a great place to leave it. And I'm apologies that we haven't managed to get through all the questions today. But we both really appreciate everybody's input on these sessions. Do keep joining us on a monthly basis. Do keep sending your questions in. And we hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, the recording will be available in the next couple of days. We'll send that out to you. Sally, any last words?
I can't believe it's gone so quickly. It's brilliant. my last words are, it's great to be back. I so love doing these sessions. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your questions. They are so helpful. And, you know, Tom and I are always here if you think of something afterwards. You know, you don't have to wait till next month if you've got a question.
Yeah, you can contact us via support@prowritingaid.com. You can find Sally on Twitter at SOJSeaside. I'm also on Twitter. I can't remember what my handle is.
I'm glad you know my Twitter handle, because I don't.
I've just sent it to somebody who asked. So yeah, but anyway, we will see you again next month, second Tuesday of the month. Have a wonderful time till then. Happy writing. Hope it goes well, and thanks for joining us again. Bye all.
Bye.